Mandela and the World Cup. When Africa welcomed the world. For 1 month in 2010, the sound of football echoed across South Africa, stadiums filled with colour. Vuvuzelas sounded through the streets, flags from dozens of nations waved beneath the African sky. But behind the celebration was a story far greater than a tournament. It was the story of a country once divided by law, now welcoming the world through open doors. And at the heart of that story stood Nelson Mandela, a man who had spent 27 years imprisoned, yet emerged without surrendering his belief that people could build a future together. When Mandela appeared before the World Cup final, elderly and physically frail, the crowd did not simply see a former president. They saw the long journey of South Africa itself. This is the story of Nelson Mandela, the 2010 World Cup, and the moment an entire continent stepped onto the world stage. For much of Nelson Mandela's life, South Africa was governed under apartheid. Apartheid was not merely social prejudice. It was a system of laws designed to separate people by race, where people could live, attend school, work, travel, and participate in politics was determined largely by the colour of their skin. Black South Africans, who formed the majority of the population, were denied basic political rights and subjected to forced removals, passed laws, and widespread discrimination. Mandela became one of the leading figures in the struggle against that system. In 1964, after the Rivonia trial, where he was convicted of sabotage for his role in the anti-apartheid struggle, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Much of his confinement was spent on Robben Island, where prisoners endured harsh conditions and hard labor. Mandela entered prison as a resistance leader. He would leave it 27 years later as one of the most recognizable symbols of freedom in the world. Nelson Mandela was released from prison on February 11, 1990. 4 years later, South Africa held its first national election in which citizens of all races could vote. Mandela became the country's first black president and the first elected through a fully representative democratic election. Apartheid had legally ended, but its wounds had not disappeared. South Africa remained divided by painful memories, economic inequality, and deep mistrust. Mandela understood that laws could change quickly, while hearts often changed much more slowly. He therefore looked for places where people who had once viewed one another as enemies could stand together. Sport became one of those places. Mandela did not believe that a match could erase injustice or solve every national problem, but he recognized that sport could create a shared moment, one in which people temporarily lowered their defenses and saw one another differently. Years before the World Cup, South Africa's victory in the 1995 Rugby World Cup had demonstrated that possibility, but football offered an even broader stage. It was the game played in neighborhoods and townships throughout South Africa. It was also the world's most widely followed sport. Hosting its greatest tournament would mean more than playing football. It would allow South Africa and Africa to tell a new story about itself. No African nation had ever hosted the men's FIFA World Cup. When South Africa sought the right to host the 2010 tournament, Mandela became one of the country's most powerful advocates. He joined South Africa's delegation and supported the campaign before FIFA. The bid carried enormous symbolic weight. For generations, much of the outside world had viewed Africa mainly through images of war, poverty, and crisis. Mandela wanted the world to see something else: modern cities, cultural richness, human warmth, and the ability of an African nation to organize a global event. On May 15, 2004, FIFA announced that South Africa had won the right to host the 2010 World Cup. Mandela lifted the trophy in Zurich with tears of joy. South Africa had defeated Morocco and Egypt in an all-African bidding process, securing the first World Cup ever staged on the continent. The victory belonged to more than one man, of course. Government officials, organizers, construction workers, and thousands of others would be responsible for making the event possible. But Mandela gave the bid its deeper meaning. To him, this was not simply South Africa hosting a sporting competition. It was Africa receiving the world as an equal. Winning the bid was only the beginning. During the next 6 years, South Africa faced enormous pressure. Critics questioned whether the country could complete its stadiums, improve transportation, provide adequate security, and successfully manage millions of visitors and viewers. Some even speculated that the tournament might eventually be moved elsewhere. South Africa answered those doubts through years of construction and preparation. Stadiums were built or renovated, roads and airports were upgraded, rail, bus, and rapid transit systems were expanded. Broadcast and telecommunications infrastructure was strengthened. Tens of thousands of workers helped deliver the facilities and services required for the tournament. The costs and long-term usefulness of some projects would later be debated. A World Cup could not eliminate South Africa's poverty, unemployment, or inequality. But the country had been given a deadline, and it met it. When June 2010 arrived, the question was no longer whether Africa could host the World Cup. The World Cup was already there. The tournament was scheduled to begin on June 11, 2010, with South Africa facing Mexico at Soccer City in Johannesburg. Mandela had hoped to appear at the opening. Then tragedy struck his family. His 13-year-old great-granddaughter, Zenani Mandela, was killed in a road accident while returning from the World Cup's opening concert. Mandela withdrew from the ceremony to grieve with his family. The terrible loss placed private sorrow beside national celebration. Yet the tournament continued, the event Mandela had helped bring to his country unfolding while he mourned away from the stadium. When South Africa finally took the field, Siphiwe Tshabalala scored the first goal of the tournament with a powerful strike against Mexico. The stadium erupted. The match ended in a 1-1 draw, but the goal became one of the defining images of the tournament. A South African player racing toward the corner as teammates followed, and a nation celebrated. For a moment, years of preparation, doubt and expectation were released in a single roar. Over the following month, South Africa became the center of international football. Supporters arrived from around the globe. They encountered packed stadiums, public viewing areas, music, dancing, brightly decorated makarapa hats, and the unmistakable sound of vuvuzelas. The home team did not advance beyond the group stage. South Africa became the first host nation eliminated at that point of a World Cup. But the tournament did not lose its African spirit. When Ghana advanced to the quarterfinals, supporters across the continent rallied behind the Black Stars. Ghana came within a penalty kick of becoming the first African nation to reach a Men's World Cup semi-final. The dream ended painfully against Uruguay, but the sense of continental participation remained. The 2010 World Cup was not perfect, and the unity it created was not permanent. No sporting event could undo centuries of injustice in 4 weeks. Still, millions saw a version of South Africa that years earlier had seemed nearly unimaginable. Black and white citizens celebrating together, while guests from around the world filled the country's streets. The nation had not escaped its problems, but it had demonstrated its possibilities. By the time the final arrived on July 11th, Nelson Mandela was 91 years old. It was a cold winter evening in Johannesburg, and his health had become fragile. Even shortly before the final, it remained uncertain whether he would be able to attend. Then, before Spain and the Netherlands played for the championship, a small vehicle entered Soccer City. Seated inside were Mandela and his wife, Graça Machel. Wrapped warmly against the cold, Mandela smiled and waved. The response was immediate. Nearly 85,000 spectators rose in celebration. Vuvuzelas sounded. Applause rolled around the stadium. His appearance was brief, but it did not need to be long. The crowd understood what it represented. Here was a man who had once been confined to a prison cell by his own government, now being welcomed by people from around the world inside one of Africa's grandest stadiums. Here was a country once internationally isolated because of apartheid, now hosting the largest sporting event on earth. And here was Africa, not standing outside the global celebration, but at its center. Mandela did not stay to watch the entire match. He did not present the trophy. and South Africa was not one of the finalists. Yet emotionally, the evening belonged partly to him. Spain eventually defeated the Netherlands 1-0 in extra time and became world champion. But South Africa left the tournament with something less measurable. The World Cup did not solve the country's continuing inequality. It did not erase racial divisions or guarantee that every stadium and infrastructure project would deliver lasting value. A responsible telling of the story should not pretend that 1 month of football completed Mandela's work. But history is not shaped only by permanent solutions. It is also shaped by moments that alter what people believe is possible. For decades, apartheid had told South Africans that separation was the natural order of life. Mandela's presence at the World Cup final offered the opposite image. People of different nations, languages and races shared one stadium in a democratic South Africa. The country had moved from exclusion to invitation, from isolation to welcome, from being defined by apartheid to presenting itself, however imperfectly, as the Rainbow Nation. The World Cup could not complete that transformation, but it allowed the world to witness it. Nelson Mandela once spent his days behind the walls of Robben Island, separated from his family and denied his freedom. Decades later, he entered a stadium filled with the flags of the world. He was no longer a prisoner. South Africa was no longer ruled by apartheid, and Africa was no longer waiting for permission to host the world's game. That night was not meaningful because every problem had been solved. It was meaningful because the journey had once seemed impossible. Mandela's appearance lasted only a few minutes, but some moments do not need to last long to carry the weight of history. The final whistle eventually sounded. The crowds went home, the stadium lights faded, but the image remained. Nelson Mandela, smiling beneath the winter sky as Africa welcomed the world. Because sometimes victory is more than lifting a trophy. Sometimes victory is living long enough to see the walls that once confined you replaced by doors opened to the world. This is Miriam Inspire One, where history reminds us what courage, perseverance, and hope can make possible.